here we are with East Forest. Thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. This was easy, and I will start this off by saying that it came at a very fortuitous time for me because I just recently, over the last couple months, have undergone something called surfer's ear surgery. Have you heard about this?
No.
Okay,
that
so
doesn't sound good.
It's not good at all. So when you surf in cold water for years and years and years, the cold water and the cold wind combination will create a bone growth on your ear, on your inner ear, which ultimately makes it basically seal up. So any form of infection, any kind of like little bit of wax that gets in there makes your ear totally seal off.
Ooh.
And the foremost surgeon for this surgery is based in Santa Cruz, and people will come from all over to basically get their bone chipped out so that they can hear again.
Jesus, wow.
It's not good, but
does it mess with your balance, like in your ear stuff?
It doesn't mess with your balance, but if you've ever experienced one ear sealing up completely, it makes it really difficult to tell where noise is coming from.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got this surgery done about 2 months ago, and since the surgery, there's a lot of swelling in your ear, and it makes your ear sort of seal up and then pop open again at these random intervals. So I've been dealing with this for like 2 months straight, and I reached out to you for this interview and then going to your show, and an hour before walking into your show was the first time I could hear well out of both ears in the past 2 months.
That must be very satisfying when it opens.
Well, not only that, but then I spent the next 3 hours at your show listening to beautiful music. So it was like a party for my eardrums.
Well, good. I'm glad we could pop that eardrum pimple.
Yes, it very much felt like that.
Cool.
Yeah. It's one thing that I had been thinking about really over the past 2 months was what an isolating experience deafness is. I had never really, considered deafness. I had never thought about how it changes your social interactions, but it gave me a whole new appreciation for how music and more generally sound is a mode of connecting people.
I think we take it for granted. I think we probably do that with all of our senses, but sound in particular, it's like, what was that movie on Amazon? I think it's called Sound of Silence. Did you see that about the drummer?
The Sound of Metal.
Sound of Metal. Fantastic film, but it actually cut really close to home. It freaked me out. It was so well done. I think it was, but the sound design of it and the way they kind of gave you an experience of on and off, of entering into that world of not hearing. Yeah. And like you're saying, isolating is a great way to describe it, I would imagine. But because we use sound in such diverse ways to understand the world, and then on top of that, it's almost like this multidimensional experience. You think about things like just music. Like what is that? Why is it we can relationships of frequencies and time, essentially rhythm, creates this infinite scope of emotions. Like the way it's connected to emotion, we take that for granted. It's like, but why? We understand why we need sound to hear things and echolocate where we are and safety, communicate. But then there's this whole other beauty level to it, which would be horrible to lose. Horrible.
The movie The Sound of Metal fucking terrified me.
Yeah.
Because you go, I'm sure for you, because at the beginning of the film, he's this heavy metal drummer, and the sound design through it, just in the very beginning, you'll start to hear that.
It was incredible. It was incredible how they did it. Yeah, I just felt for the characters, but as a musician, I'm like, it's like kind of your worst fear is the thing that connects you to everything of, purpose in your life, and the deepest depths of soul and emotion. To not be able to access that in the same way would be a really, really powerful medicine.
Yeah. And throughout that film, what I found was interesting is he goes to this spirit. He goes to this center for deaf people, and there's like the flip in that film is when he's contemplating getting this surgery so that he could be able to hear a little bit again. And one of the teachers at that space says, you can't be here if you get that surgery, because there needs to be some kind of psychological flip where you're no longer yearning to be able to hear and seeing it as...
Yeah, I think they said we don't see deafness as a disability or something. It's like so you're seeing it that way if you're trying to change it, correct it.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a, it brings up so many different directions, like the hedonistic treadmill, right? Like this concept that like your baseline happiness rises and falls to wherever you are. So I often wonder, like, if you became deaf, how quickly would your happiness rise or fall to that new normal? And what other senses would rise in a way that allows you to see or just experience life more vividly?
Yeah, it's giving me chills thinking about I think it was the end, because of course initially it would be quite traumatic and your happiness would probably drop. But I remember, not a spoiler alert in a sense, so if you haven't seen the film, go see it and skip ahead here for a second. But he's sitting there at the end, and it's the pure silence. And it actually, he finally gets to that place of just peace, of just the now. And in some ways, it was stronger because it's just the purity of nothingness. And that, to me, is when I just like, wow, this movie is badass.
It's such a good movie.
It's actually the nothing is what was the revelation. And they did it through sound. It was completely silent. Like, when you see an image in a film, the music actually is what brings the emotional content, and the sound itself is what takes a two-dimensional thing happening and literally connects it to your body. So the music and the sound is huge in what makes film work and stories work. We just take it for granted. So when they take it away and you're watching essentially a silent movie, it's weird. You're like, why is this? This is way different. And the fact that they ended it that way and how it connected to the story of his own equanimity was so powerful. It was like less is more in a sense. Instead of like most movies, it's all about the crazy visuals and this amazing swelling music. And this was no sound.
Yeah. My brother does documentary film, and he recently shot an interview with the composer John Williams, who has done, he did the composition for, Jurassic Park, Forrest Gump,
Indiana Jones,
Jaws, Indiana Jones. Like, he's worked so closely with Steven Spielberg, and my brother, he was shooting an interview with Spielberg talking about John Williams, and he was recounting the time that John was coming up with the composition for Jaws. So Steven comes over to John's house, and John's like, okay, I have it. And he goes to his piano, and he goes, da-dun, 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 da-dun. And Steven's like, real funny, John. Like, what's the real composition? He's like, no, it's the minimalism that makes it powerful. It's the fact that it's primal, and there's such a small amount of sound here that will build the tension of this film.
Yeah, less is more. Definitely less is more. That's a lesson I had to learn over the years. Sometimes, like in music, when you have a big drop, it's like dropping to fewer elements usually is the way to do it as opposed to more. And it's the same idea.
What does that mean?
Like in music or in dance music even, especially, you'll see like there's a build and then it goes to the drop, and you think it drops to like, boom, there's a bunch more, but actually often you taking away elements is what makes the drop feel like bigger in a sense.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. I'd never thought about that. Yeah, have you noticed that over time you've become more comfortable with silence within your music?
Uh, I mean, the short answer is yes, and the longer answer is that it's something you learn and lean into because it's a kind of trust, and I think there's a maturity to when I listen to artists like Bill Evans is a jazz pianist that I'm a big fan of, and he could play anything, and so in some ways, what he doesn't play becomes more interesting. He was got a lot of fame back when he played with Miles Davis on the Kind of Blue record, and he was really instrumental in creating that sound and that modal sound in the cool jazz of that was really like kind of cutting edge at that time. Now it's what we think of as classic jazz was about not the bebop, how many notes can you play? It's like what we don't play, and that's what creates the vibe. And so it usually is something that you start to learn and mature into over time. I think as a musician about less
Right.
and space. Space is the place, and it's really hard because it's natural to want to fill space because in some ways that's easier to create vibe with more things. We'll add this, we'll add that. Oh, if you add, okay, there's something. It's almost hard to say like what is not needed, and we'll take it away. And still, what are the constituent parts that are the minimum to create that vibe?
That's so
And
interesting.
everything's vibe to me.
Yeah, and
You know.
vibe and timing. It makes me think of beyond music, powerful speakers. Years ago, I was doing this piece on it was an environmental piece, and I had the chance to interview this really great speaker named Van Jones. Have you ever heard of this guy?
Yeah, isn't he on CNN?
He's on CNN. Yeah. And
Yeah.
just an incredibly charismatic speaker. He was really the guy that kind of, I would say, in many ways, like galvanized the idea of environmental racism, like a decade before a lot of the this kind of reckoning we've had now. And I'd seen him speak a few times before. And as I was interviewing him about like very specific environmental issues, and then afterwards I said, "Man, dude, you're such a talented speaker. Do you have any tips?" And he said, "People think powerful speaking is about what you say. It's not. It's about the moments of pause that you take between what you say." And the reason for that is that I could, like, let's say I'm talking about some little girl in the housing projects, and she's in her horrible situation, and she has a blue dress, and she has, red earrings, whatever. He's like, I don't need to actually give you all those details fast. I can just say, I was in the housing projects, and there was this little girl, and I walked up to her. And he's like, I didn't have to say anything. I just gave you enough time to build that little girl in your imagination, which is where the emotion hits.
Yeah, it's an art because the rhythm there can also then go the other direction where people are like, yo, this is overdrawn
Yeah.
and obsequious. And so some people have that gift. It's a naturalness of understanding the rhythm for impact and finding it and, finding also the moments where maybe it needs to flow. And the little I know of him, he definitely seems like a really powerful figure.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in learning about your process creating music because we only get to see the finished product, and it comes
Sorta, because actually, I sorry to interrupt you,
Go for it.
but there are moments more and more in my ceremony concerts where it's an improvisation. So in some ways, you're seeing the process. You know what I mean? It's like the process in that sense is very much being witnessed and sharing that space with other people is what makes the thing happen. And then in that space, if the vibe is right and we're giving each other the attention and we're really there together, then you can go to those spaces of improvisational freedom and something new can become in that moment. That's not the only way I make music, but I think that's one really special way. And that harkens back to like jazz again, of improvisation and the power of that and the what you're giving yourself over to. And I think there's personally nothing more interesting than watching music be birthed in the moment. Like when I see art, like Jon Hopkins last night ended with an improvisation, and it was magic because it had the bob. It had that, oh, there's something happening here. And I think for us these days, that's very, very attractive as humans. Everything's so polished and digitized and reproducible, and that can still have impact. But then when we see something ephemeral and see something that, in essence, your attention is helping create it, which I think a lot of people don't realize, like the role they're playing as an audience member and how powerful it is, and how they can actually suck the energy out of it by not giving their attention, which happened last night, with various people. Then you're really in that space of becoming. That is just.
Okay, I want to know.
That's what I live for.
Yeah, no, I want to know more about this because I don't think that the audience, I certainly didn't think it last night, how my energy was impacting your willingness to improv. So bring me into like the conversation inside your head last night. Did you do any improv last night?
Yeah, but not as much. I always go that direction, but it's sort of like a lighthouse that you're going towards, or it's like surfing is a good example. Like you're looking for the waves, and then you try and catch them. And sometimes you catch them, and then when you do catch them, it's a wave. Like you don't want to it's about the flow state. And so you're not about thinking it through. It's actually more just like, no, you're just riding this wave. It might be a sweet tube. It's going to end, and that's cool. That's how it works. Everything flows and changes in the universe, as does creativity and performances. And the trick is like when it does sort of cascade and end, not trying to grab, oh, fuck, there's not going to be another. It's more like it's totally the zen of like, okay, now we just keep swimming and give up, where I can't control what wave comes next, but I can be ready to try and hop up on it. Now, what is the audience in this metaphor of the ocean? That's a difficult one to tie the threads, but let's say that the ecosystem is a bit smaller than the whole ocean, and somehow it's like a little mini ocean, like a lake, and that still creates waves. People are like, what creates waves in the first place? I'm not an expert on that, but it's some sort of like the tides, how things like, it's almost like traffic patterns. All these little cars, like everyone's little decisions about how fast they go inevitably makes these groups of energies that creates traffic and then openings and traffic. And the same thing happens in galaxies and how flocculent arms form. I know this is getting kind of disparate.
I'm in, dude. I'm so happy we're having this conversation right now.
It actually is the same effect, if I remember correctly, from astronomy class, which is fascinating. Like the way we just naturally as human beings in groups, in traffic, speed up and create these groups and the spaces in between. And then galaxies form that way. And it's spinning naturally and creating these groups of arms. So anyway, imagine everyone in the audience is like a star or in a galaxy or like a bubble of water in the ocean. And it does matter, like, if they're giving your attention is your currency, as I mentioned last night. This is Tristan Harris' idea, which is a powerful thought and also an ancient thought, that where you put your attention really matters. That the energy goes there just for your own self, but also what if there's an alchemy to that? What if there's actually, I hate using this word, but like a quantum element to like where you put it, like almost an electrical firing that does have this impact, especially in a room. The group coherence, these are things we can feel. And it actually like goes the other direction where one person on their phone, or you felt it, like last night there was a guy who was tripping out, which was a little like, I could hear it, and I wasn't quite sure where it was happening, but it really threw me. And other people were like, everyone gets a little tense maybe, or like, what's happening in the room? I can feel, are we on the edge of something bad, or do we need? That's one person that can change the whole room like that. Or if I see like three ladies that were having a conversation, just chit-chatting, whereas behind them all these people are having these deep experiences, you'd think like, well, you just play for the deep experiences, but it's like someone poked a hole in the balloon and the air is just flowing out. And then, so they're not really thinking very consciously about the effect that they're having by putting their attention on this conversation, which has nothing to do, I don't know what they're talking about, but it sucks the energy out of the focus in a way. It's like a boat with holes in it now in our little lake. It's just like got drag. So when normally I'll ask people at the beginning, I'll talk about this and say, like, if you give me your attention, which is such a gift, I'm giving it to you. We're in a conversation energetically. And in a sense, like, you're helping me surf. You're helping create these waves. So the way the audience, just being present with what is happening, that's kind of the fuel. That is what makes the waves, in a sense. And so without it, there's nothing to surf. It's just little surf. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like you can look for the waves, but it's like, well, there's not much to surf here.
Dribbly a little wind swell. What are we going to do here?
Exactly.
So for people who weren't at your show last night, it's different than you might imagine a concert being, where there's the artist who's elevated on a stage and everyone is facing them.
Right.
You're at the center of this sunflower-looking thing. And there are yoga mats set out in rows out to like 5. And how many people were in that room?
There were 300 in that space.
Okay.
I think it was 8,000 square feet or something. It's in the round, and people can lie down.
Right.
And the idea is so you can have a more immersive experience with the sound itself and go deeper in your, having to stand. You can totally drop in.
And then there are projectors on the wall, which are spackling these changing galaxies all throughout the room, and it's going from cells to oceans to galaxies, and yes, maybe I'm imagining all
Strange
that.
Loops, I think is his name, did some amazing visuals. And in that space that we were at here in LA has projection mapping on all the walls. So I mean that adds a whole nother layer of sensory experience.
And what were the instruments that you're working with on stage?
For me, it's a piano, grand piano, and I have like a Nord keyboard set up, and then can live looping from there, so I can loop the vocals or anything through the Nord. And what's nice about that is it's very free. Like you can totally improvise or change things or flip things around, and I try to keep it like that way, so it's as live as possible. So you have that, so you can meet the moment. Like if you're feeling something, there's that inspiration, you can just go there.
Is there an instrument that is more akin to improv? I'm really interested in that moment where you flip from a scripted show to starting
any
to improv
instrument.
more.
Of course, the piano is just completely analog, right? And the thing you hear a lot these days, and I use it too for certain songs, is elements of track. And so for me, that might be even just a kick drum. So I have like different kick drums or different hi-hats. Or of course, when I'm playing a Ram Dass sample, I'm triggering that sample, but it might, the more you kind of pull it apart, as opposed to like hitting something that's just like a song and I'm playing against it, it's like maybe the Ram Dass sample can be broken up, and I could play different music underneath it, throw Ram Dass on top of that, and then get inspired. I could pull a different Ram Dass sample for a song, and it just gives you the freedom to experiment and hopefully take risks. And taking risks as an artist, you have to feel that you have trust, again, with the audience. And if the audience feels like you feel like these people are supporting me and they really want me to like lean in, and I feel like, okay, I feel safe essentially to maybe make quote unquote mistakes, or, that's the opposite energy. Is like you feel like you might be embarrassed, or the vulnerability it takes to be like, I'm going to, in your mind, you're like, I'm going to go for this chord and sing this line. And I think I'm feeling like that's going to be exciting, but maybe not. And there were maybe nots last night where it's like, but I think I'm almost more proud of when I'm able to take those risks versus the result that happens, because I know that's an edge for me. It's always safer to do what works. I just think it's less interesting as a performance. It can still be good. It can be great, but transcendent is when you chase those, like you chase a wave that's a little scary. Like, can I handle that? Or like, should I do that? And instead of even thinking about it, when you're really in the flow, you just hop up.
Do you get embarrassed on stage?
Oh, fuck yeah, man.
Really?
Yeah. I'm a human being. I get nervous. I get scared. All of it. I mean, it's a mix. It's like anyone's humanity. There can be a mixture of like feeling prowess while also feeling fear at the same time. In some ways, they should go together because it shows you're on an edge.
Right.
If I'm feeling like totally nothing, it's probably like, are you pushing yourself at all? You know, as an artist, I always want to feel like I'm trying to grow and the way you grow is finding those edges of fear in a sense.
Is there an aspect to your art that you're most afraid of right now?
And excited by it at the same time. Well, I'd say it's improvisation in live performance settings, because there are times where I do it completely, and that's always in the ceremonial medicine containers where it's like strictly, like I say, a psilocybin ceremony, small group, very intentional. Like those, I actually don't see it as a performance. I feel like I can only see what wants to come through, because it's not about me and like trying to entertain people. It's like, no, something wants to flow through, and everyone in the room is like, we got time, and it behooves us to let the music be patient and take its time forming. So like my albums, like Music for Mushrooms or even Music to Die To, Music to Be Born To, Prana, these were all recorded in psilocybin ceremonies. And it's all improvised, and it's all just music being born, 100%. I would like to bring that more and more and more into like what we did last night, where it's a hybrid. Yeah, I call it a ceremony concert because it has those elements of ceremony, being in the round and longer form, lying down. But there are plenty of people there who it's like a concert. They're just there to like, I want to just watch. And I'm trying to find that hybrid middle ground where it's for anybody. And it's an interesting space where like, well, some people are choosing their own adventure. They journey how they want to journey. And some people are coming in and their adventure is like just sitting there and like they've never experimented with any psychedelic or anything. And I'm not condoning saying you need to be in here doing a psychedelic. I don't even talk about it. I'm not asking for that. I just know people do what they do. And so I'm trying to create a space that's like, well, what's the core human element in these experiences that is open to everybody? It's not about a certain tribe or group. It's like you were talking about with sound and music and just listening. Everybody can do that. Everybody can breathe. Everybody can listen for a few seconds, get a few prompts. And I think that's what's really interesting to me, is like the commonality, like how this could work with lots of different people.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of thought put into how you can give someone the best possible experience. Like there seems to be like, what interests me about you and about your music is that it very much is a beat to this new psychedelic renaissance, in the way that there was the 60s beats, there was Woodstock. Like, this was the first wave of the psychedelic revolution, which was largely based on, anti-war, anti-establishment, not a lot of real understanding around set and setting, which gave way to, I think, a lot of the bad press that was coming out around it, which is people having these incredibly powerful, vulnerable experiences, but not really knowing how to integrate that back into their lives. And I think that probably the biggest difference between the 60s movement and the movement today is that integration aspect, and the focus from both journalists to musicians, like, all on, it's not just about the experience, it's how you then take that next step into your life. And I continuously see you like put your focus on that integration aspect of the journey, which is cool.
Important. Yeah, it's very important. I guess it's sort of what makes it have value in your life. But I do think what's different today is there's a bit more intentionality attached to it, or you're seeing that happen more and more. And there's also more therapeutic modalities. It's just more mainstream and more research happening, which got shut down so quickly, 1970. So with that coming back online, it gives a lot broader context for people to have faith in maybe this is something for them. But more important, I think it meets the time. The time now is about us going through collapse and a world that's dying. And people are struggling to find meaning in a dying world. And that is really, really hard. And I think a lot of us still aren't, we know it. Some of us know it fully. Some of us just know it in our hearts, but our brains haven't really caught up, and we're still trying to like find, quote, the new normal, or we're trying to just muscle through, where it's like just a lot of people are just trying to find the way to cheat the system. It's like maybe there'll be a new crypto that, or it's this, I'm going to, do this thing with my friends, whatever. It's escapism in a way, but there's nowhere to run.
How do you see differences in this movement compared to the 60s movement?
The similarities?
Similarities and differences.
Well, yeah. So what I'm speaking to are the differences. Like, there are harbingers back in the 60s of the collapse we're experiencing now. It's just much more acute. Like, we're further along the apex curve, where it's sort of we're in the birth canal, where now it's inevitable, and it's easier to feel that and see it. So what I'm trying to say is, like, I think we're all starting to really pick up on, there's a collective agreement, like, on things now, like on environmental problems and collapse, for instance. And this is one issue. And it's no longer like, I'm not even going to entertain the people who say, like, it's not even happening. It's like, I don't care why you think it's, but I think we can agree it's happening. The people who are like, it's not happening, forget about that. But we mostly can agree, like, yeah, there's some serious shit going on. Like, weather is quite crazy. There are a lot of wildfires. There's incredible floods. So things like that. The world is dramatically shifted. And we're not going back to a different world. Certainly in our lifetimes, it can be many, many generations. And so the question becomes, like, how do we work with this? And what opportunities are there in this change? And that's what people are coming more online to, is like less about pushing it all away and finally realizing it's kind of like we go through maybe a sickness or something. At first you're just like, I don't want this to be happening. But eventually you're like, I can't change that. And people come full circle into what gifts are there inside this experience, making lemonade out of lemons, because you have to. We're in this time where I feel like people are brave souls, where it's like finding their bravery and their courage through their own predicament that's unique to them. And so psychedelic experiences can be very powerful experiences to accelerate some of that growth and show you things, essentially, that might take a very long time, or maybe you really need a strong experience to kind of crack you open. But like you said, what you do with that, what kind of support you have, and how you translate into the meaningful growth in your own life is important, because otherwise it's just an experience. But it is unique to everyone. And so I'm very interested in helping those experiences be powerful and gentle. And I think music plays a huge role in that. And I think it's a huge blind spot in this psychedelic renaissance that people don't understand very well. One, because it's an art. So you can't really just quantify it and say this many milligrams or this way. It's like there isn't one way. And it actually is. People ask me all the time, like, what type of music works, or how do you make the music? And I can't just tell you it's like this. It's like teaching someone how to paint. It's like, and then you'll paint how you paint.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's also what makes it so deep and beautiful and elusive in a way. And when you hit those magical moments, why it's so special, because it is like, it is the universe itself creating and celebrating the depth and infinite ways that things can be created.
Yeah, it's almost like a huge amount of the population has the knowledge of the predicament that we're in and the change on a planetary scale that needs to be made. And we just need to find our unique art to transmute that knowledge so people listen.
Yeah, I do think creativity is the base substrate of what it means to be a human, and most of us have abdicated that responsibility to someone else. We pay for other people to do it, but it's not just something that we all can do. It's critical to feeling to be fully human. And in some ways, the decisions you make, all of that is a creative act. And so the inner landscape is sort of where you go to get in touch with making those decisions from, like, it's like the source code. It's like, oh, okay, this is what I want. This is where I need to go. The rest was just confusing me. It's fog in my journey, but now I can see the constellations. I'm like, okay, right, I remember now. That's what's important to me. And I trust that when people go inside and they discover that, they typically move into feeling that interconnectedness, which hopefully moves into like a sensation of us versus just me. It becomes more about service, about connection. No doubt, people can get into self-delusion and self-aggrandizement. That can be like sort of sidetracks people take on some of these journeys, but it's sort of a sideshow, when it's enlivening someone's narcissism. But that's not, I feel like once you that's why it's helpful to have community and support and integration to people to say like, hey, you're not Jesus, we're all Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, in a sense, like, let's get you back on track here a little bit. You maybe should take a break and work on, like, how does this work in your life? As Ram Dass said, he was told, when you're taking all these, you're getting high all the time. It's like you're running from life. It's like life is a school. Why don't you try taking the curriculum? And
it's like someone who says, I took LSD and realized I was God. And then you say, that's great. Am I God too?
Yeah. So it's not, in some ways, the psychedelic experience is like we're talking about music. It in itself is not something you can just quantify, and that's why it's elusive too. There's things you can do to sort of set yourself up for success and have it be positive and useful to your life, but it's not as simple as like you just take a pill and then everything works.
Yeah.
That's actually why it's so great, because it takes courage, it takes bravery, it takes intention, it takes support, and it's art in itself. It's like, if anyone's had the experience, you come back and you can't sum it up in a way. It's about a feeling that more than any kind of thought or anything you'd ever write down.
I want to touch on something that you said there, which is the ego and narcissism, which can be a sidetrack of the psychedelic experience. And I want to get your thoughts on that, because it to me it seems like more than a sidetrack. It seems like the post-psychedelic ego inflation is something that is remarkably common.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've seen or listened to the recent podcast Power Trip, which is really about a lot of these psychedelic gurus and people going down to Latin America to have these ayahuasca experiences, and many people coming out about sexual assault, about very creepy instances with these shaman. And it's happening here in the US too. And I think that it's very important that we speak honestly about this underbelly of certain psychedelic circles. But I wanted to get your opinion on why you think psychedelic prominence, or maybe it's just spiritual prominence, can give way to that kind of poison. Like, what happens within a person's psychology that allows them to end up in a place that is the exact opposite of what they profess?
Psychedelic prominence mean like fame, essentially, notoriety. People
I
get
think, like,
notoriety in that space.
Yeah.
It's human nature. It's no different than when they have any notoriety or power. Power can corrupt. It's like putting dangling carrots in front of us that give us opportunity to bring out the worst of humanity, destructive, negative tendencies. So I don't think it's unique to the psychedelic space. But I do think for people who are in that space, we have this natural desire for projection and giving away our power. And, I see that a lot in even my own little small world. The things people say to me and I say back to them, it's like, thank you. But, I'm just a guy. Like, that's your projection of who you think I am. And we all do this naturally, because we're looking for things that we want in ourselves, and we project them on other people, and then we give our power away. In many ways, like the psychedelics and this opportunity, let's say it goes back millennia, was taken away from us by the priest class and the churches to say, like, no, we'll have this experience. And you dummies, like, we'll translate it for you through words and ritual, but we'll get the direct answers. So it breaks that down to say, like, you can have a direct experience with the numinous, with the divine, and you have self-discovery and self-generation. I think that's the real magic and strength of what's happening right now. It's about going right to the source yourself, and hopefully having support to work with that. But some people still go back into these old patterns of, like, I need to find someone. There's a fine line between a teacher and a cult leader.
Yeah.
But it's just, again, it's going back to human nature. So, I mean, you really need to find people with integrity. And it's natural that as something like this expands and money comes into the picture, it's going to be a messy process. But that's not to say that there isn't, like, many people working with high integrity and having really, very strong positive experiences that are honorable. And so anytime money and popularity comes into this space, you're also going to see a lot of takedown pieces. So some of these pieces I've seen, I think the stories need to be told, but they have an agenda. They're trying to it's almost like feeding into the clickbait world. It's like, well, it's not a balanced story. It's like, you're right, this is a nuanced story. Let's tell the nuanced story, but don't just tell one side of it. Let's tell all the stories. So I'm deeply, I think there's nothing, like, for instance, sexual assault in the psychedelic space. There are a few things worse. Someone is unbelievably vulnerable and open in that state on all levels. And to violate that space is incomprehensible to me and deeply wrong. But people are human beings. Shamans are human beings, and they can be very flawed. And so that's why I think it's important for people to be extremely careful and thoughtful if you are going to work with anyone, a therapist, anyone, to take your time with that. And really start to understand and who they are and what their process is. Who's, hopefully someone people who've worked with them, because we are going to see mistakes made in this quote unquote renaissance and revolution.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean the revolution. I don't think you can stop it, but I do think it's like, allow people to make mistakes inside a cancel culture, and have justice and have responsibility needs to be taken. Absolutely.
It makes me think of the line, follow those who seek the truth, beware of those who claim to have found it.
Yeah, Dao De Jing style. Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of red flags that can help you, like, navigate this.
Yeah.
Anyone who tells you they figured it out, it's like, run away.
Yeah, exactly.
I
beware of the rhinestones.
Exactly. Yeah, if they have multiple Rolls Royces, it's like, I don't know, something's going on here.
Yeah,
it doesn't add up to me.
I had the chance to do a really cool meditation retreat a couple years ago with this really great guy named Adi Ashanti. You know who that is?
Yeah.
He's up in the Santa Cruz Redwoods, and he was talking. Someone asked him similarly, like, one night. It was a silent meditation retreat. But every night he would do these songs where he would speak, and you could go up and you can ask one question. And one guy asked, how do you deal with the notoriety and this fact that you're on stage professing wisdom to us? How does that not malign your...
corrupt
you? And he said, pretty early on, I told my wife... he said, if I start to get weird, please let me know. And I think that's super important, right? Because the more notoriety you get, the less people can be willing to be honest with you. It's like I once heard a CEO say, like, the richer I got, the funnier I got. So having people who can tell you when you're being a ding dong is super important.
Well, yeah, it can go beyond being a ding dong, but absolutely. It's something anyone who is in any kind of public space these days, I know for myself, it's a moving target and something almost on a daily basis. You have to reorient what your priorities are. And it's a strange position to essentially be working to inspire. I'll be honest, I think I do it because I'm wanting to inspire myself. And it's sort of the golden rule in a way. If you make others feel, let's say, loved, then you feel loved. And so I'm on the journey too. And so I try to just stay truthful to like what struggles I'm going through and what I'm working with. And I'm kind of just flipping around the language to talk about maybe this is for you. And I try to also be very conscious to speak about it like it's an invitation, or like this is what my experience has been, never to say this is this, do that, or it's like I don't know. You know, it's art. It's like we're all just telling stories essentially. And I hope to, continue listening so that there's space for many, many stories.
Yeah. I'm going to switch gears here and ask you about something that you probably didn't expect, which is acetylcholine. There's a researcher named Andrew Huberman who talks a lot about learning, and he deconstructs learning. What he says is that that feeling of agitation and frustration when you're going at any craft, when you're trying to learn anything, that feeling is acetylcholine being released in your brain, and it's fairly uncomfortable. That's like the feeling that makes you want to quit when you're sitting down to write something. It's like, it's a feeling when you're going uphill, slogging through the mud. But he says what he thinks we need to shift as a culture is our relationship to that chemical, because acetylcholine is the gateway to neuroplasticity and learning, which I think about often because it flips that feeling of discomfort on the way to growth. And I wanted to ask you about your process creating music when it's not going well.
Well, that makes a lot of sense when you say that, because I think about that's how practicing works. Like you're trying to do something, let's say play something on the piano, and you're having trouble physically doing it. You're like, I can't play this. But by sort of just trying to do it for a while, the next day, usually, it's now easier. How does that work? That's what practicing is. It's very strange. But once you've done that for enough years, you kind of trust in that process. So you're feeling that feeling you're talking about, and you just allow it to exist. I feel it every single day when I'm rehearsing. I don't know if you like the War of Art. You read that? It's that resistance idea that every single day there's this feeling of like, I don't want to do that. There's no point to doing it, but I should probably do the emails first, or maybe I'll get a snack. All the things, and you push through it with this awareness of what's happening. And by pushing through it, afterwards, now in a sense, there's meaning to the day. There's meaning to myself for this day of existence, from sunrise to sunset. And I can't totally explain that, but it is very, very real and true. And so I completely understand it almost sums up the human journey. It's like we're meant to have friction and challenges so that we can learn. That's the whole point of being here. Like the friction is the point. Avoiding it is pointless.
Right. So is there any kind of rules you'll put in when you're doing a frustrating practice session? Like a lot of writers talk about setting a timer. They'll say, I'm going to keep my ass in the chair until the clock hits noon. Do you have anything for yourself, or another one that people talk about is rewarding yourself after you get through the practice session, so that your brain associates the practice with something good at the end?
It's more like doing it the first part of the day, like first thing, so I just know it'll slip away, and it's like a monkey on my back all day. And so if I hit that, I'm just saying it's very important to me, and I know that even though there's so much resistance. And so that's the main structure around it, is like, that's what we do first, even though it's the thing I want to do the least. But then I know it'll serve the whole rest of the day.
Do you practice first thing in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, I have my morning routine and all that. So I don't like to like get up and rehearse. But
what is that?
Just having my coffee. I like to have a slower morning, just kind of arrive into the day. So I would say like 10 a.m. to like 1 or 2 is like, that's the magic time for me to create. Like, my brain's the freshest. Everything looks, that's the best time. Afternoons, I find that, you get a little tired, and I think like, oh, I'll just rehearse later. And sometimes I'll rehearse later, and it's just like, man, this is a struggle. Like, I'm not fully here. Evenings, no good. Now, you can always change this. Like, there are times where you need to work all day or all night, and that's fine. But I just know, like, the day-to-day, like hacking away, chopping the wood, it's the mornings.
Yeah. And are you usually doing that by yourself?
Yeah, totally. Unless, you're in a session with people. But I mean, the vast majority of time, I'm largely a solo artist. It's just me. Even a lot of times when I tour, like here in a hotel room, I'll have to set up just my live rig, not the whole piano, of course. Just to keep, it's a muscle, so it's like working out. So if there's going to be more than like 2 days before the show, I have to keep, it's a fucking drag,
Yeah.
Like, we were in a hotel in Portland, and I had a show on Sunday, and we got there on Wednesday, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna have to set up and shed a few times, and there really wasn't even enough room, so we moved hotels, because like I need to play, in the hotel, even if it's just 20 minutes, it's just sort of, it just keeps it in your muscle memory, and because you want to get up on stage and you're not thinking about it, it is a muscle memory. You can just flow with it.
Yeah, and it goes fast.
Yeah, it's probably like stand-up comedy. People say you have to get up on stage regularly or anything. Or athletes, they have to work out. It's the same thing, I'm sure.
Yeah, and just steeping yourself in it. There's
it just helps. It just makes me feel more like I'm honoring the muse by dropping into that space to rehearse. And even like, sure, there could be arguments. I don't need it. Or maybe it's like, maybe the show, I've done shows where maybe it's a surprise show, and it went great, but it's more like there's a confidence of like, I've been giving my gifts to the altar of the muse, and so I feel better that I will be given back now, and then I can almost lean back a bit in the show because I know I've done what I can do. I'm not responsible for the fruits, but I am responsible for the labor, kind of idea. And so if I put in the labor, it's like there's a pride there and a humbleness. It'd be like, I'm glad I did my reps.
Right. You showed up the best you could.
That's all you can do.
Right. What do you think about the muse? I mean, you're like, is it Stephen Pressfield, right? Like, he's in many ways seems like this kind of like military man, very like you show up and you do the work, but then he has this soft spiritual reverence for this muse, and when he writes about that, it's almost like he takes this more hushed and respectful tone because he knows that there's this thing.
Don't piss it off.
There's this thing here, and it could leave you at any time. How do you think about the muse?
I don't think of it as fickle in that way or judgmental. I just think about it almost like, it's the same way I think about the universe itself or existence itself. Like, there's this plenum of consciousness and energy that we are just a part of. What we aren't not a part of it. So it's not about like some vengeful feeling like it's going to punish you. It's more like I punish myself by extracting myself from it, or forgetting, or identifying too much with everything that's really just the surface of the ocean, when there's this depth of the ocean that I'm part of too. I just have to drop into it. It's like peeling back the onion, as we were talking about last night. And so the way you do that is by, when does the muse show up? Some writers will say at 10 o'clock when I sit down to write. It's when I have to. It's me showing up is when it shows up, but it's again like the surfing. It's when I get into the ocean. That's what I do. I don't know what the waves will be like that way. It doesn't matter how great the waves are. All you're proud of is like, I suited up, I got out there. Was it big surf, small surf, grit? Did I get hurt? Was I this? That you can't control, but you're like, I got in. I got wet.
Yeah.
You got to get wet.
Yeah. Do you find that your progression is more of steady up to the right sort of trajectory, or would you say that it happens where it can sometimes feel like you're static and then you'll have some massive jump out of nowhere?
No, more the slow and steady.
Steady.
I've been at this for almost 15 years, and really just like since 20, maybe 16, 17, more in a concerted public way. And it's been very, very organic and slow, but steady.
Yeah.
I think we all want those big jumps. It's always like, oh, if such and such happens, then this will be. Even last night I was joking with John about I was packing up my gear, and he wasn't packing up shit, and I was like, I gotta get one of those guys to to pack all my stuff up, because this is I want to hang out,
Yeah.
This has been, how many years have I been packing this up, putting it, and he's just like, you should do that. And I'm just like, I don't know. There's these, you keep thinking like there's these milestones that would do it. And it's more like you look back and you're like, oh, even last night I was looking down at the room while that was going on, and you forget. You're like, a few years ago, I would have had a hard time imagining this would even be happening. And right now it just seems like, of course this is happening. But it's good occasionally to take stock, to be like, where are we at here on this tree? How did that happen? Or, where do I want to head? But it's been a very organic process. I haven't really changed what I've been doing since the beginning, but the world has changed a lot. It was very not cool back in 2008 to be playing music for psilocybin ceremonies. My friends thought it was weird. Advertisers wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, like websites that talked about it. Everyone was just like, oh, yoga DJ, East Forest. I've never DJed a day in my life, like,
yoga DJ, East Forest.
Constantly, because they didn't know how to talk about it. Yeah. And they still don't, but at least now it has more relevance to the world. Has changed so much, but I didn't have to change what I was doing. So I'm very grateful that there's relevance. That gives me great pleasure to feel like useful in the world. But if anything, the world has brought out some of my strengths and allowed me to lean into them and cultivate them without having to change my core values.
Yeah, it would be a much different experience selling yourself out and then having a huge audience show up.
Which happens all the time, all the time. We see that, where it's like you find the lowest common denominator that's successful and you just lean into it. And it's like, I can't do that. I say there's a part of me that wishes I could, because I'm like, oh, life would be easier in my mind, but I can't. I have to do like what I feel like is my truth, and for better or worse. And I'm deeply grateful that has any meaning for even a few people on this planet.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, you're hitting a very specific kind of person. This is the kind of person that's like, last night it was a non-alcoholic event, right? Mm-hmm. They were serving mocktails. If you were a musician coming up saying, all right, my concerts aren't going to have booze at them, people would be like, what are you doing?
Which is anti-music industry. That's how most venues make their money.
Exactly.
So, you're already now you're doing a model that doesn't really work inside the tradition. These are the challenges we face. It's like you're trying to like work inside a broken system, essentially.
Right. But the argument for what you're doing is that the more specific of an audience you find, and the more you say, all right, if you want to come to my show, it's going to be a very conscious event. We're going to be on yoga mats. We're going to be experiencing music in a totally different way. You get super fans who then want to talk about that experience to all of their friends, because you're not trying to be everything to everyone. So I think
am
you should
trying
keep
to
going for it.
Well, appreciate that. But I am actually really trying to normalize the experience, to say, like, there's nothing happening here that everyone couldn't do. You know, breathing, listening, and I want it to be blissful and I like ceremony concert. I say that phrase because I want it to be like there is elements of entertainment. You could just sit and watch it when I normally play, and not know anything about any psychedelics or meditation or even care, and still be like, I enjoyed that performance. There's good music and it had an arc and a flow, but I felt some depth and some emotions, and that to me is smart, quote unquote, entertainment. But the fact that, like, there's all these little doorways in it, that if you want to go down these doorways, and that's the invitation, just small things, you know, that are open to anyone, maybe there's some sort of interior depth there for you that's profound, or something you haven't experienced in a long time. And that's a human story. And so I think just music and that structure and that mechanism of doing live music in groups like that, I wanted to think, like, how can we take that, which we already know can be powerful and awesome, and maybe like squeeze the most juice out of it, with the intention of a deeply emotional experience that is about an inner journey.
My man, we've been going for an hour. Please plug your podcast and all that you're doing.
Well, my podcast, I think it's been going, you asked about this, about 3 or 4 years. It's called 10 Laws with East Forest, and it's conversational based, but sometimes meditations and music. And then a lot of live events out there in the world, doing these ceremony concerts and venue concerts, as well as retreats that I do with my partner Radha at Esalen and other places, and many other doorways in. But I guess the easiest is just eastforest.org, or wherever you listen to music, East Forest, or social media has the East Forest or East Forest Music. It's easy to find. And it's all meant to have, again, like different doorways. Find the one that you feel most comfortable with, and we'll see if there's conversations to be had in a sense.
You're doing it, man. I really enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks. Me too.